Hi, I'm Matt here in Michigan.
And I'm Randall here in Texas. Today, Matt and I are continuing on with our Star Trek The Original Crew movie marathon. We've already done Star Trek The Motion Picture and Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan. So now we're going to do Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock. The title kind of gives it away, honestly. This is a movie that gets the original crew back together for another adventure. It's directed by Leonard Nimoy. That's a topic in and of itself. Matt, it's an odd numbered Star Trek film, so they have a kind of a bad taste as it is. They're the bad Star Trek movies, so we say. What did you think of Star Trek 3 The Search for Spock?
So, I have to say one thing. When I first started watching Star Trek films, this was my favorite Star Trek film, and I'll get into why that was in just a little bit. But, it's a pretty good movie. Now, after watching, the motion picture again and watching Wrath of Khan and now Search for Spock, I definitely like Wrath of Khan more than I like this film, but this film I think is pretty good too. So let's go back on why I kind of liked this as like my favorite when I first started watching Star Trek. One, it's called Search for Spock, and my favorite character at the time was Spock. So even though we don't see, Leonard Nimoy's Spock a whole lot in this film, the fact that it was called Search for Spock or whatever made it, one of my favorite films at the time. The other part too is I think this is the first of the three movies that we see a big presence from the Klingons, and I have always been interested in the Klingons. We did see the Klingons in the motion picture and stuff with like V'ger, but for this one we actually the Klingons are the the prominent, bad guy in this one. And our main Klingon is played by none other than Christopher Lloyd. I mean, you gotta love Doc from Back to the Future kind of thing. So I think those elements together made this my favorite film when I first got into Star Trek. Like I said, I even looking now, I think Christopher Lloyd did a pretty good job as a Klingon, even though some people might debate that.
Yeah, that's its own other thing. Um, this film comes out 2 years after Wrath of Khan, and it's definitely another tonal shift. But I gotta get it out right away. This film starts, and Leonard Nimoy as the director, he's putting this thing together, and he did the right thing. But it's like right as it starts, he replays some of the most emotional parts of Wrath of Khan, where Spock dies, and you have to relive that, and I'm just like, oh, you're making me do this again. You're putting me through this again. Like I just watched it. It's sad, and now you're doing it again to me. To get the audience, and like this is mostly a direct sequel to Wrath of Khan. It's the middle part of a trilogy, really. It's this is called the Star Trek trilogy, 2, 3, and 4. They tell their own story of the crew, and I think, is it as strong as Wrath of Khan? No, but is it like, oh, it's an odd Star Trek movie and it's kind of a dud? I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot here to like. This movie takes the crew back to Earth and the battered Enterprise back to Earth, and you get that really really cool scene where everyone's staring at the Enterprise like, oh my god, that's the Enterprise, and it's taken this much damage. That's the Enterprise under Captain Kirk, and it's taken this much damage. And you get this awesome scene where you see the Excelsior, and you get some background. This movie does a lot better job of world building than any previous Star Trek movie did. It's like you have a whole new space station where where you're actually docking everything, and that will go on to be used in Star Trek TNG all the time. I think that this film deserves more credit than it gets for what it did for the Star Trek universe as a whole. It Even like you said, the Klingons, they're not like, it's not like the Klingon Empire's the bad guys. It's just this single Klingon crew who's like, yes, the notoriety of being the Klingon that took down Captain Kirk. while he was in command of the Enterprise. That's all he's after. You know? And that helps cement a little bit of like Klingons in this time period of the universe in the 23rd century before they're actually allies, which we won't even get to until like the TNG era, the end of the original crew era. This is a really undervalued film if you're a person like me who loves Star Trek canon.
And going on the Klingon crew and stuff too, they even say in this kind of thing, like, even as we're like negotiating with, the Federation at this time, us as a crew, we're kind of like doing what we think is in the best interest of the Empire kind of thing. And one thing I want to you're touching on too, basically talking about, the Excelsior or whatever, when they're going into space dock, that is a good theme that we've taken a little bit from the first two Star Trek films that we're kind of continuing. We're talking about like them moving on, like Kirk being an admiral, and that's different. And then he wants Enterprise, and then this third movie, it's kind of like the Enterprise isn't the best anymore. The Federation is kind of moving on. We're building ships that have better capabilities and stuff than the Enterprise. And that was a big thing too. The captain of the other ship and stuff, he's basically talking, he's like, yeah, I'm looking forward to beating the Enterprise records and stuff too. It's kind of talking about that, and a lot of the crew members are being treated as kind of like old and obsolete thing. They're kind of not old bats, but kind of on that thing a little bit. And I think it's a good build up from the last two movies going into this movie.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at this point, after the great success of Wrath of Khan, to actually see the investment in this movie that we did get, like I said, you get a whole redesigned space station, and you get a whole new Federation ship in the Excelsior, and it's not like we're going to take the nacelles off of the Enterprise and put them on this, other ship like we did with the Reliant. It's not done on the cheap. It's a whole new design, It was nice to see the studio put that kind of money into it. And they also are like, well, even though we put a whole bunch of money into doing this, and also the Klingon bird of prey, I should mention that, but we put a whole bunch of money into the Excelsior, it's so it will pay off later. Because the Excelsior is not shown that much in this movie. It's not that big of a point, other than, it's there, and it's the future. And it will be. And it will be a thing that's around in Star Trek lore for a really long time. The Excelsior class, including the Enterprise B here, which in Star Trek Generations is a modified Excelsior class. It's amazing that the studio and the filmmakers were really starting to think of Star Trek as this property with lore, and that we can expand on it and we can do world building.
I think it's funny that you mentioned the Enterprise B too, because I actually forgot about this part of the movie, with the Excelsior and stuff. And I'm looking at them like, is that the Enterprise B? Like, that was my first instinct. I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's not the Enterprise B, kind of thing. But that was kind of like my first kind of like instinct kind of too. And I think it's funny that you actually mentioned the Enterprise B, and that was what was in my head when watching this film.
Yeah, so honestly, the Enterprise A isn't even around yet. We're still on the Enterprise. But that's a story for Star Trek V, which we'll get to. So the other thing, though, that I like about this, and it continues the theme from, like you had said, the motion picture and the Wrath of Khan, is seeing the characterizations. The characters just, they have to deal with the death of Spock still. It's weighing heavily on their mind. But you get to see Earth. You get to see some of the not necessarily best parts of Earth, too. With McCoy having Spock's thoughts, or whatever, his Katra like stuck in his head. He goes and tries to find basically a pirate, or someone that he can get him to take him to do this kind of underground mission. And before the crew understands what's going on and what's happening, before Spock's dad comes, Sarek comes and says, "Oh, then he is lost because it's we lost his Katra." Only to find out that it's actually Bones that has it, which is obviously the most fun, unlikely character to have it. Give it to Bones. Give it to DeForest. He'll do it.
I think DeForest he did an excellent job basically trying to play like two characters, in one a little bit. Like you see he's still Bones, but he also has the influence of like Spock. It's almost like, the way they kind of explain it, it's like he has part of Spock's soul in him. And so it's a constant battle in his head. You start, hearing Bones when he's in that scene, he's talking about like logic and stuff like too. Like stuff that it wouldn't normally be Bones. And other times when he's on the Enterprise, he's those small, like makeshift crew that they have on the Enterprise to go back to Genesis and stuff. He is kind of performing as the science officer, as like Spock, and that's kind of like a good moment, I think, in the film where Bones kind of looks at Kirk and is like, how did I do, kind of thing, and Kirk's kind of looking at him and like he's like, I almost forgot that it wasn't Spock in that chair.
Yeah, it's fun. So as the movie progresses, they come back to Earth. The Enterprise is all battered up, and they're trying to deal with it. And then they find out, well, okay, things aren't quite right with Bones, and so they put together the crew. It's like it's not a oversimplification to say that literally the main crew of the Enterprise steal the Enterprise. They are not under orders. They're not allowed to go to Nexus, the planet Nexus, and they do anyways, and they steal the Enterprise, and freaking Scotty, he flat out goes in and sabotages the Excelsior so that way they can't even follow them. And he's got the Enterprise at least operational. Not great, not in great shape. Shouldn't be in any space battles, which is bad for later. But um, just so they can go on the chance that they can go and help Bones and help Spock.
And at that time, they don't even know that Spock is alive or that Spock's been regenerated, however you want to put it. I mean, technically, Bones has like Spock's soul kind of thing. And if you talk about like body kind of thing, like Spock's body has been, regenerated kind of thing. But yeah, they don't even know. They're basically, the idea that they're going is they're going to recover Spock's body to bring it, to Vulcan so that they can perform what would be their basic like burial ceremony and stuff for them kind of thing. That is what they're doing, and they risk everything. Like Kirk, for so much of the first two films about Kirk's identity being a captain, to showing that Kirk is willing to give all that up, his identity, willing to give that up in order to do this mission.
Yep. And ultimately, this is why it's part of this Star Trek trilogy, as it turns out. Um, Getting demoted back to captain from admiral, which really is kind of a slap on the wrist. But the events of Star Trek 4, there's a little reason why it's a slap on the wrist. But um, you're right. So they don't even know what's going on the planet Nexus. They don't know that like the ecosystem is unstable. They don't know that everything's being accelerated. That the lifespan of the planet is infinitesimal in comparison to what a real lifespan for a planet should be, because it's all been they don't have access to that. They don't have that information. It turns out that the Klingons don't know that either. They're just after Captain Kirk and the Enterprise, and they follow them to the planet, and everyone kind of gets there, and David, which is Kirk's son, is on the planet with Lieutenant Savick from Wrath of Khan, and they found some biological non-plant life, and they're like, "Whoa, that shouldn't be here. What is that?" And they follow it up, and they look, and they find this like boy, this, I don't know, how young exactly, but, and they're like, "Holy crap. This was Spock's tube. This is, where gave him his space funeral in Wrath of Khan." And everything starts coming together, like, oh, he's aging rapidly, he's aging with the planet. As far as like cheating death, I prefer the way that this did it, where it's like, okay, he died. He really, really died, and this is a new, different Spock recombined from his genes as compared with the way, you know, Into Darkness did it, where it was just like, or Star Trek Picard did it, where it's like, oh yeah, he died, but don't worry, he's back.
Yeah, it really does parallel. I think now that I think about it more of like the Star Trek Picard, because that's the kind of thing too. It's kind of like you're taking Picard's mind or whatever. Where in this one it's like Spock's soul is like in bones kind of thing. Like his mind, his soul or whatever is in bones, and then they're transporting it into this body. To me, I think what kind of gets me is that that they're putting Kirk into like an engineered body, like you said, and this is not.
Not Kirk,
This
Picard.
is or Picard, sorry, not Kirk's body. Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? They put they have the both two of the best or whatever, Picard and Kirk's mind.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
No, What I'm saying is basically, they took Picard and they put him in kind of like like an android, body or whatever of representation of him, Gollum. But in this one, it's actually Spock, body regenerated kind of thing. It's still Spock. I don't know. To me, it seems a little like similar but different, and I accept this one I think a bit more than I do the Picard one.
Yeah, I feel like this. He did not cheat his death. He went knowing that he was going to die, and as far as the crew was concerned, he really, really did die. And in Picard, they have this, this overly long scene where everyone's crying about him dying, but in reality, the scientists are just like, yeah, we got this golem over here. We already know what we're gonna do, and it was like telegraphed from a mile away. You don't get that here. You don't really know that going in, and that leads to a whole nother discussion about the film and the fact that really Leonard Nimoy strong armed Paramount Studios because he was once again done with the character. Just he's been done with Spock so many times, only to come back and reprise the role. And he's like, "I'm not coming back unless I can direct." And Paramount was like, "Well, he'll come back. He'll come back. We don't want him to direct. He's not, he'll." Nope. He was very adamant that he will not come back and reprise Spock unless he gets to direct the film. And he did direct this film, and I think he did a pretty good job, honestly.
Oh, I think he did do a pretty good job of this film, directing and stuff wise too. And kind of go on that, talk about, Nimoy kind of like leaving Spock. There was an opportunity in this movie to do like the same at the end, where, Spock kind of doesn't fully have his like memories back and stuff too. They could have decided to go a different route. It's like, well, we're going to keep Spock in the universe, but we're not necessarily going to have him be, still part of the crew. They could have done something where, he doesn't like fully regain all of like his memories and experiences. But, I'm kind of glad that they did the other route and that we have that touching moment or whatever at the end where, Spock goes over and is looking at each member of the crew and it's slowly coming back like, Jim, your name is Jim. And then that line, like you said, we get to replay, over and over in this film, relive that touching moment, like, I, am and forever will be, your friend kind of thing. We get that again at the end. And, I'm glad that they did that. And we had that whole, like, the crew, back together, embracing each other at the end of the film. I thought it was a good way to end this film.
And there's really not much talking about this, but there's because it's a not so well loved version of the Klingon, Christopher Lloyd. I think he did a fine job, honestly, especially in consideration. But retrospectively, a big thing happens in this for Kirk's character. Kirk's son David is killed by Christopher Lloyd, Kirk, and it's devastating. Kirk just found out that he had a son. He didn't even know. And then it turns out that his son is a lot like him, except for he's like a scientist instead of an explorer, like, not like a gallivanting starship captain, but is a lot like him, very headstrong, etc. and then to just have that just taken away, you know? The death might have been a little underwhelming as from an audience perspective. Like it's not like he was a hero per se, but you know, he saves Lieutenant Savick, he saves young Spock, and again, this is a huge milestone for Kirk, like another dent in the armor, as you will. Like Kirk's definitely starting to see his own mortality and things leaving his life, and he has to deal with that.
I think too that kind of goes on with how much stronger this movie is with the other films. I mean, before we had our discussion on sequels and stuff, and you're looking at some of the best sequels are ones that stand on their own, and I think that's why Wrath of Khan is better, is because Wrath of Khan stands on its own, where this movie is stronger having already seen Wrath of Khan. This really, like, you definitely should watch, Wrath of Khan and watch Search for Spock. These two movies definitely go together, with this being a direct sequel to that one. David's death kind of feels a little bit, less, like you said. But having experienced going what we just went through with Wrath of Khan, with that big character-changing moment for Kirk, where Kirk felt renewed, rebirthed by finding out that he has a son. He has something to go on for. He has a future, with David, kind of thing, and that is taken away in this film. So, in this film, they take David away from him. They killed David. So, in the context of that, the two movies, it's much more impactful. But I agree, if you hadn't had watched the last movie and just watched this on your own, it doesn't feel like it gives as much.
Yeah, I mean, if you imagine what Kirk is going through at that time, Spock died, now his son's dead, and in the context of the universe, they're only they're very close. These things did not happen years apart like the movies. they're right on top of each other. It sucks. it's not a fun place to be. But then the only other like truly amazing thing that happens in this movie, and you're just like, this happened in Search for Spock, and you're like, yeah, this happened in Search for Spock, is the destruction of the Enterprise. So Kirk, in his typical fashion, like, what have I done? He asks Bones, my God, Bones, as they watch the Enterprise burning up in the atmosphere of Nexus, Genesis. I said Nexus. I've said Nexus a lot. Oh my God, I'm awful. I'm the worst Star Trek fan ever.
I was kind of thinking, like, Randall knows something I don't know, or whatever. maybe they called it Nexus after the Genesis project was used, kind of thing.
I'm the worst Star Trek fan ever. It's okay.
That's right. I already called Picard Kirk, since we're talking about Kirk too.
So, but the Enterprise is burning up in the Genesis planet's atmosphere, and Kirk is looking up, and this really emotional moment for the crew as they've beamed down to the planet, which is quickly being destroyed underneath their own feet. And he's like, my God, Bones, what have I done? And he goes, the same thing you always do. You've given us a chance. So, my God, Kirk loses Spock, and then he loses his son, and then he loses the Enterprise. This is just like a beat Kirk down. This is like I said, the middle part of a trilogy. This is really hammering at Kirk, before he's more or less gonna goat Kirk, which is again Christopher Lloyd's Klingon. He's like, all right, you want me, you want Kirk, come down and get me. Similar, like really the same tactic he used against Khan. He's like, all right, Khan,
we fought it your way. Now it's time, you come after me in this.
You know what? If you want me, come get me. Basically.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you were mentioning about that interaction with Kirk and Bones, and I think that ties into another thing later in the film, and that's between Kirk and Spock's father, when basically Cybok's like, I can't believe...
Yeah, Sarek.
Or Sarek, sorry, not Cybok.
Cybok's a different film.
Yep, Cybok's a different one. Yeah, another, Vulcan kind of thing or whatever, relations or whatever with Spock or whatever. But basically where he's basically like, Kirk, everything that you gave up, like his identity, like Kirk's identity has been, captain of the Enterprise. and his son. It was what added to his identity to say that you gave up the Enterprise and your son, to bring my son back to me. And then Kirk's response to him was, if I didn't, I would have lost my soul, basically thing. So I think that was a good character building for Kirk. We really understand, it's not, his main base isn't the Enterprise and stuff. It's, his soul. His soul is like the main thing that has more importance over that. That's something he's not willing to give up, is his soul.
And this film ends with all of the terrible, tragic things that have happened. It ends like a Star Trek film should, I think, end on a happy note. It ends, and Spock is still trying to put everything back together. So they get Spock off the planet, and once he's off the planet, in the Klingon bird of prey, which they steal, they straight up steal. Then he stops aging rapidly, and he miraculously ends up being about the same age that he was anyways, of course, because it's Leonard Nimoy. It's
Great
okay.
timing.
Great timing. This is the perfect time to pluck him off the planet. But the movie ends, and you get them. They transfer the Katra from McCoy to Spock's body, so he has his thoughts and his soul and his memories and what made Spock Spock, and he's trying to put it all back together. And he says, "Why?" He asks Kirk why. And Kirk's just like, or I don't know, it's not Kirk, but just like the idea, he goes, because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. He turns that typical Vulcan saying around, and the logic of it, where it's just like, this was something that we had to do for ourselves. This was something that we had to do for you. And that just, it's a hopeful, nice ending, really, for this movie. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
It talks about how, as a group or whatever, you think about logically how, it's best to do what's best for the most, or for everyone, kind of thing. And this is, like you said, it's important to have that individuality. Like you said, this is a decision that we each, as a group, but as individuals, decided. We needed to do this for ourselves as well, to help you.
And each member of the crew does something very important and very integral to the plot of the film. They each have their own little thing that they do. I know, Sulu takes out the giants.
Oh yes, that is a great scene too, where you see him kind of towering over him or whatever, and he calls him something not tiny, but something along those lines, kind of thing. And then you see Sulu just flip him over and stuff to see that oh yeah, you think you're big and stuff, but I can take you out. That was a great scene.
Yep, and Chekhov is, okay, Chekhov doesn't get much to do in this. I'll give you that. But and Aurora gets to go. She's like the contact for them on Vulcan. She's not doing a whole lot, but she's like, all right, I'll see you guys there, basically. When you get there. And she's there when everyone's reunited. And obviously, I'd mentioned earlier, Scotty just straight up sabotages the Excelsior. Everyone's more or less got something to do, except for poor Chekhov.
Poor Chekhov. To echo this, what I was saying earlier, I think this is a really good movie. I don't think this is a movie that if you're like, what, I want to watch a Star Trek film, let's go watch Search for Spock. I think it's definitely one of those that's I want to watch a few Star Trek films where if you are like, what, let's watch Wrath of Khan and then watch this, after watching Wrath of Khan, that's definitely what I would recommend with this film.
Yeah, that's the way to watch this particular Star Trek film. So, if you like the kind of thing that we're doing here, we've already got the first two in the bag, and we're going to continue right on through Star Trek 6. Stay tuned. We're posting these once a week. Look forward to it. Make sure to give us a like and a subscribe and hit the bell icon if you guys want to know when we upload. For now, I'm Randall here in Texas. Everyone have a great day.
I'm Matt here in Michigan. Have a good day. Next time on No Market Media. Please consider checking out some of our other videos.